Okay, we're live. Hello, everybody. We'll give folks a few minutes to come on in, but I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Marilyn, the director of Rainbow Alley, and this is one of very many series of speakers that we have. We have two each week, Tuesday and Thursday. And we're going to be talking about the outdoor industry. So I'll give folks a couple of minutes to come on in, and I'm going to put this lovely link at the bottom of the screen. It is for a survey. Sorry, I'm a little off today. It's for a survey for this particular session. There's also a post survey, and the benefit to participating in our surveys pre and post is to enter a raffle for a gift card. So, free money. So y'all can take a chance to fill that out. And then at the end, I will put up the post survey link for y'all to fill out. One specification is that anybody can fill out the survey, but only youth can be entered into the raffle. So that is that. I'm going to get folks a couple more minutes, and then we will start. So how are you doing, Jenny?
I'm doing pretty well. Yeah. I'm excited to do this. The evenings get really monotonous. Now I'm still in somewhat of a self-quarantine, as I think a lot of us are, just never doing anything or going anywhere.
Yeah.
So this is a great way to break it up.
Yeah. It's gonna be fun. I think I'm a little more alert now, so we're okay.
Awesome. Yeah, you could chug a glass of water, or no, that'll probably make you have to pee.
Yeah, I've been drinking water for a bit now. I have a headache.
Cool.
That's
Stay hydrated out there.
Yes. Yep. Mm-hmm. All right. So, all right. So I guess we can get started. So as I said, we're going to be talking about the outdoor industry and jobs in the outdoor industry. And I have Jenny here with us, who is a proudly queer adventurer and outdoor recreation professional with experience in many fields, including trail work, environmental activism, and community outreach. Currently, she works for Big City Mountaineers, a nonprofit that leads backpacking expeditions for under-resourced students. Jenny is also a thru hiker who has walked over 5,000 miles. That's a lot. On the Continental Divide and Pacific Crest trails. So that's a lot of miles. Jenny, tell us a bit about yourself.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. So I am Jenny. Yep. I am 31 years old. My pronouns are she, her. And I am here to talk to you guys about my personal journey, and I'm really excited to do so because this is a subject that I never knew existed, careers in the outdoors. Nobody told me about that when I was young. I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, fairly like typical suburban upbringing, 0% outdoorsy, unless you count like the stream that ran through the neighborhood. And yeah, when I went to college in Ohio, I decided to major in theater. And my whole vision for my life was just that I wanted to be a starving artist, you know, like live in a closet in Queens in New York City and just like cook ramen on a little camp stove. But little did I know I'd be cooking ramen on a little camp stove somewhere very, very, very different. Yeah, so that's my background. Do we want to dive in and start talking about my discovery of the outdoors?
We sure can. Do you want me to pull up the PowerPoint?
Yeah, I've prepared an amazing slideshow for you guys with some of my favorite pictures. So I can illustrate the journey. All right, yeah, we're calling it Backpack to Briefcase, Building Careers in the Great Outdoors. I want to make it very clear and very known that I've never owned a briefcase. That is a metaphor. So, yeah. Next slide. When I was in college in 2009, I did something really unexpected, and I decided to go on a backpacking trip. I didn't know what backpacking was when I agreed to it. I thought that we were going to be staying in hostels and going to bars and like experiencing a bunch of different cities. But no, my best friend invited me to Nepal to hike the Annapurna circuit with her. And that was over 100 miles, crosses one of the world's highest crossable by path mountain passes, the Torangla Pass, which is over 17,000 feet, almost 18,000 feet. And I was just not ready, like indoor kid. I had never done anything like that in my life. But from that point in time, I was so hooked that with the exception of a couple weddings, I've never taken vacation days to do anything but backpacking since then. And I just fell so deeply, deeply in love with it. And after I graduated college, I visited the same friend in Colorado. And I can totally pinpoint for you the moment that I knew my life was going to change. I was like lying on a rock on my back in this meadow, staring up at the stars on my first backpacking trip out here. And the thought just occurred to me, like, you don't have to stay back east. You could move here. And I think I had just never realized that before, thought of a life like that as an option. So always remember that. So I moved to Colorado. Next slide. Moved here in 2012. I've had a bunch of different jobs working for almost exclusively nonprofits. And I started out as the director of something called the Activism Theater Troupe in Fort Collins. And then in 2013, I had my first outdoor job. I needed a change, and I decided that I wanted to spend 5 months on a trail crew. So I worked for the Southwest Conservation Corps based out of Salida. I like kind of lived in my car and kind of was backpacking for the whole 5 months. And it was awesome. And we're going to talk about trail crew a little bit later. But yeah, so after that, I had explored a lot of Colorado when I was on the trail crew. And I kind of got it in my head that I wanted to hike this trail that went all the way from one end of the state to another, the Colorado Trail. And then I learned that trail actually, like there was a bigger version of that trail called the Continental Divide Trail, and it went from Mexico to Canada through New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana. And even though that trail is supposed to be like really hard and not for beginners, I got it into my mind that I was going to hike it. And a couple years later, in 2016, I did. Next slide. So this trail is over 3,000 miles long, although because everyone takes sort of a slightly different path, I definitely didn't hike all 3,000 miles, probably a little bit closer to 2,600. But it's the hardest of what they call the Triple Crown trails, and that includes the Appalachian Trail and the Pacific Crest Trail. And this was just a very notable accomplishment for me because it was something that nobody thought I could do. Like, I remember having a conversation with my friend and I was like, can you believe it? Like, my parents tried to have an intervention with me to tell me I couldn't hike the CDT. They just like don't think that I can do it. And the friend was like, well, I think they're right. Like, you're not in a good place. Like, you don't have the right experience. You should probably be doing something that isn't that. Wow. I did it. I made it from Mexico to Canada. And that experience was just so empowering in terms of what it taught me about myself and what I was capable of. Shortly before I set out to hike the trail, I had just been through a huge mental health crisis. I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And while the outdoors is like not a panacea or a cure for any kind of mental illness, it is the most effective way that I've ever known to be able to manage it. And it just kind of put me back on a trajectory to like live my life in a way that I felt happy with and that I could control. And so that's when I decided I wanted to have a career in the outdoors, and I wanted to just like, you know, soak it in 24/7, make this my life, and try to help people who had experiences like I did, who, you know, like had been searching for a long time, had struggled, hadn't known that stuff like this had existed. The outdoor industry, as we'll talk about, is rife with like barriers and lack of representation, and often just like outright racism, sexism, homophobia. And so a huge part of why I want to be in this industry is to change that. All right, I think we have a couple slides of CDT pictures coming up, actually. Just wanted to give you guys some glimpses into the highs and lows of the journey. I hope you like the looks of that water there on the right. The next slide is just one of my favorites that I put in all presentations about hiking. And it's, people do a lot of fear mongering when you're someone, especially when you're a woman and you say that you want to do something in the outdoors. You hear a lot of reasons why you shouldn't, or like things that you won't be safe from out there. And what was funny is that on the CDT, I did not encounter many threats from bears. You know, the snow that everyone warned me about was fine. But it was still like drilled into my head day after day in Colorado, which was the only state we ever met like day hikers or weekend hikers in, that it was dangerous for me to be a woman doing this alone. And almost every day hiker that I ran across on the trail would ask me the same question: are you alone? And when I would say yes, I would get anything from a weird look to a lecture. And it bothered me so much. And I eventually realized that it bothered me so much because their subtext of that was like, I would have thought you would stay home. You know, you're being a woman out here is so brave. Like, you really, like, I would have expected you to make the decision to be in your living room. And then I will tell you one little story that I love, though, is at Cottonwood Pass in central Colorado near Buena Vista. And I was crossing the trailhead to continue on the trail, and I met these two women, and they shared some snacks with me, which is the great thing about day hikers. And one of them said, "Oh, well, are you alone?" And I was just like, in my mind, I was like, oh God, I don't even know what to say, like yes or no to avoid the lecture. And I was like, yes. And she said, "Oh my God, that's amazing. I'm so excited that I met you. I can't wait to tell my daughter. She's 10 and she wants to hike the Colorado Trail one day." And yeah, that's kind of what I'm talking about. I think that's why this is also so worth it for me to be doing. All right. Yeah, so then I have a couple more pictures from the CDT. As you can see, that was the more joyous side of things. So I got home from the CDT, yeah. I got home from the CDT and decided, like I said, I wanted a career in the outdoors. It was very serendipitous. The Continental Divide Trail Coalition happened to be hiring like the week that I got back to Denver and was looking online for jobs. So I spent a year working for them down in Silver City, New Mexico, which is right on the CDT and pretty close to the Mexican border, maybe 60 miles as the crow flies. And that gave me a whole new insight into the sort of like conservation work that we do. Like here in Colorado, the outdoor community is so whitewashed. Down there, it's not. And like down there are people who care deeply about the land and about the trail, but they really don't care about like crushing miles or through hiking or all of the like very macho tropes, I guess, that come with being someone who's into the outdoors in Colorado. So that was a really lovely experience. For CDTC, I did a variety of things. I was kind of the person who worked with communities along the trail, the Gateway Community Coordinator, to raise awareness about the trail. It's actually, a trail like that is like a huge economic driver for tiny towns in the Rocky Mountains. So we wanted to make sure that local businesses were realizing this and finding a way that like could be really productive for both the hikers and the towns. And then that also invested them in our mission of conserving the CDT, protecting the CDT. So that was a really cool job. After that, I came back to Denver and I started working for Conservation Colorado. They are a political nonprofit, and their mission is to protect Colorado's public lands, water, to fight climate change, and to advocate for environmental justice. And my time there, I was a field organizer, so I was going out and directly meeting community members, using all kinds of tactics, going to all different kinds of events, and educational events, just engaging people in the legislative process and the electoral process on so many different bills and issues relating to the environment. I mostly worked on public lands and climate change, but that was also, you know, where I really got to dig into the world of environmental justice. I think for those, I guess we'll talk about that a bit later too, but for those who are unaware, environmental justice is basically intersectional environmentalism. You know, it recognizes that low-income folks and people of color are the ones who are most impacted by climate change, who are most impacted by pollution, and that we need to prioritize finding solutions for like racial and economic inequity if we actually want to like combat the climate crisis. Cool. And then after a while at Conservation Colorado, I heard the call again, and I decided that I had to hike the Pacific Crest Trail. And this time I went the opposite direction. I went from Canada to Mexico through Washington, Oregon, and California. And the PCT was just the opposite experience of the CDT for me. So it sometimes looked like, next slide.
Oh, sorry. Oh, crap.
No worries.
I don't know what happened. Something happened. Okay.
So yeah, sometimes the PCT was super Instagram worthy and looked like this. Oops, that's over a lamp. And then other times the PCT looked like that. Yeah. So, well, the CDT had empowered me. The PCT humbled me, and it was also in a really good way. It was very different. You know, the challenges there were a lot less grand. It was just like rain every day, mosquitoes every day, too hot, too cold. I had some of the same issues that I had on the CDT when it came to like being really anemic and losing too much weight. So just like struggling physically a lot. And on the PCT, I did something that I had not done before, and I thought all the time about quitting. But I didn't, and I'm glad I didn't, because like that tapped into a different like reservoir of myself. and, you know, taught me about like different kinds of challenges to overcome. The cultural component on the PCT was really different. People were never that shocked to meet a solo woman on the trail. The trails were full of hikers, sometimes severely overcrowded.
Wow.
But I also like made such amazing friends out there. And then when I came back to Colorado after the PCT last fall, I started searching for more outdoor careers. Our lovely mutual friend Amanda Jameson alerted me to a job opening at Big City Mountaineers, and I applied for and then became our national program associate, which sounds like it means nothing, but what it actually means is that I was supposed to help run trips this summer. So Big City Mountaineers runs backpacking trips for students. We'll actually talk more about, I have it there in my presentation later, but I was supposed to run the trips. The trips got canceled. Today was supposed to be the day that I headed out on a trip with Rainbow Alley. Meryl, were you supposed to go on that trip too?
Yes, I was.
Ugh. It's so hard. I looked at the calendar today because, of course, I wrote it in huge Sharpie letters and then had to cross it out in also very bold Sharpie. I was just like, oh my God. So if anyone who is going on that trip is out there listening, know that I'm totally gutted that it didn't get to happen this summer, and I really hope we can make it happen in 2021. Yeah. So, and then the other component of my job at Big City Mountaineers is running our new BCM Leaders program. And this is, again, something that we're not quite going to be able to do as we wanted to right now. But it's about connecting students with careers in the outdoors. So a microcosm of what this presentation is. We're hoping to take students who are interested in learning more about outdoor careers and expose them to a lot of different guest speakers and chances to learn and connect them to opportunities in that way, and hopefully connect them also with the opportunity and training to be a BCM instructor. That's what they want to do. Okay, so that's a lot. That's a long story. Do you have any questions at this point?
I do. And just so folks know, those who are watching, you can feel free to put any questions in the comments. We will see them. We will probably leave them towards the end of this session, but feel free to just hop in whatever y'all feel like. I did have a question. Actually, a couple of questions. You said the first time that you any long distance hiking was in Nepal at 18,000 feet with no training.
We didn't start.
Oh my God. How did you survive that? Because, you know, with altitude sickness and acclimating in general to any form of altitude, that takes time and training. So how did you manage that?
That's a really good question, actually. And I'm glad you asked, because there's certainly a perception that to do epic stuff in the outdoors, you have to be a super athlete. And like I said, I was an indoor kid. I had tried to go running once in college and disliked it immensely, and never did so again. So my friend did take me on a few days backpacking trip in Ohio where we went to school just to make sure that I could do it. And it was so hard. It was the worst. But somehow I managed to hike 11 miles in one day. And she was like, all right, you proved yourself. That means you can do it. And I was just like, does it? Because it was, and back then the packs that we carried were so heavy. But for me, it was just worth it, you know, to see the leaves changing, to just sleep outside where everything was so simple, and where life just felt real. in a way that I had never known before. Like it just hooked me. And it seemed worth it to go to Nepal. I'd always wanted to go to Nepal and see the Himalayas. And then I was actually studying abroad in Johannesburg leading up to this trip. And Johannesburg, like Denver, is about a mile high. So luckily I was able to acclimate to the elevation somewhat there. And I did force myself to go running on the campus of the university where I was living, and got a lot of super weird looks because like public jogging is not huge in South Africa. But I made it to Nepal. We did not start 17,000 feet. And we went slow. Yeah. I was really worried about altitude sickness, and so leading up crossing the pass, we would like hike to a town, stay a night, hike up, and then come back down, stay another night. We were like trying to very, very slowly build up our tolerance. And luckily in Nepal, you can buy a lot of medications over the counter that you need a prescription for here. So we bought anti-elevation sickness medication, Diamox, I think it's called. And I took that the night before, right before we crossed the pass.
Okay.
But I think it made me feel better. And it absolutely, like walking up to that pass, I felt like I was walking through Jello and that I would not make it. So there you go.
Yeah,
but I did.
Okay. And one person asked, and I'll put it up on the screen. What are some tips for solo hiking safety?
Awesome question. So the biggest tip for solo hiking safety is to make sure that somebody else back in the wilds of civilization knows where you're going and knows either when to expect you back or when to hear you check in. If you're on something like a through hike, there are devices that you can buy. I have something called a Garmin InReach that actually has an SOS button and allows two-way texting, even in areas where there is no cell service. And I've never needed to use it, luckily, though it did go off once by accident. So if you're on a through hike and you're hitchhiking, I think that can absolutely be like the most dangerous time for a solo hiker, especially like a solo woman or like femme presenting person. And a good tip that I've gotten is to take a picture of people's license plates and text it to someone before you get in the car. And if there's no service, just like pretend that you're texting it to someone and make sure they see you do this. I don't think that hitchhiking is inherently very risky. I've had like one upsetting experience in my 5,000 miles of hiking. But I think that can be a huge like mental thing for a lot of first time through hikers to overcome, because it is scary. I don't think it needs to be. And then once you're out in the woods, like I feel so safe there. There's so few people there. Like the chances that any of them are interested in hurting you are pretty slim. Especially if, you know, you're really out there, like in a remote part of the backcountry. I would sometimes be asked by men on the trail where I was camping, and I would never tell them. And I would make a point of just being like further and then like turn away. And I think that a lot of men ask questions like that without realizing how much it can potentially creep someone out. And then in terms of like bear safety, just know how to do a good bear hang. And safety like could be anything, you know, if you're worried about bears, again, don't be chances of having a bad bear encounter if you're following protocol are very, very.
Awesome. Okay. That was the only question that came up. So we can keep going.
All right. So yeah, I've sort of divided up into a couple different sections. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that when we talk about the outdoor industry, it's a pretty narrow version of what it actually means to be a person who works with and relates to our more than human world. And that like a career in the outdoors can mean surprising things. Like you'd be surprised how many people sit at a desk, you know, whereas, you know, if you have a career like farming or construction, you're outdoors. So that's somewhat a career in the outdoors. But for the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to focus on if you, like me, love outdoor recreation and you want to do something related to that. So yeah, we'll start with working for the government. So there are 3 branches of the federal government that you can work for if you want to do a job like Wildland Fire, trail crew, being a park ranger. And they are the Forest Service, U.S. Department of Agriculture, National Park Service, and Bureau of Land Management. And the distinction there is just that like it's different types of public lands run by different agencies. The National Park Service is the highest level of protection. I think most people have probably heard of our national parks. We've got Rocky Mountain and the Great Sand Dunes here in Colorado, as well as Mesa Verde and the Black Canyon of the Gunnison, and many, many other beloved parks across the country. And those are like totally protected wilderness areas, theoretically. There's actually some oil and gas drilling in some of them, but they don't want us to know that. And then the Forest Service is most of the public land here in Colorado, I think. They're split between that and BLM. So if you live in the Denver area, you might notice that the closest forest to us are the Pike National Forest, the Arapahoe National Forest. And those are areas that have like varying degrees of protection. So you might have a wilderness area where there's no bikes, no cars, or you might have an area that's, you know, for more shared use. And then the Bureau of Land Management is kind of like all the other land, and they have fewer rules, but they have the same kinds of services. And then at the state level or the city level, you can find similar type jobs. Colorado Parks and Wildlife manages Colorado's awesome state parks and wildlife areas. Denver Parks and Recreation manages our awesome urban parks. So yeah, moving. Oh, okay. And then I should also mention that most of these jobs are going to begin as seasonal. When you work for the government, it's a lot of people are very, very like career government workers. My mother's one of them. Some of my friends are too, but in very different sectors. My mother's a lawyer, and they are wildland firefighters. So you have to sort of work your way up, and they have different levels. It goes like GS3 through GS like 12. So like 3 and 4 will be internships and student jobs. 5, 6, 7 mid or entry level positions, and then 8 through 12 are like the higher positions. And you usually have to like start pretty low, but yeah, go up, the pay goes up. And if you put in the time with them, there's often the chance that these seasonal positions will turn into like year-round salaried positions. All right, so let's look at trail crew. These are actually not pictures from a government trail crew, technically. These are pictures from my trail crew when I was on trail crew. All of the pictures in the slideshow are my own. But they, you know, do as the name suggests, they build and maintain trails. So building a new trail is obviously a little bit more difficult than maintaining an existing trail. But all of the trails in Colorado and the world are constantly under threat from too many people walking on them, from runoff and erosion from the water. Sometimes, you know, a rock slide or a fire can like really wipe out a trail. So there is no shortage of work. I think that a lot of the trail crew people I know who work for the Forest Service are on saw crews. So they will be going through with chainsaws and just sort of like clearing out corridor or doing what they call fire mitigation, which is like taking down dangerous trees. There's front country and back country trail crews. So I did both. When I worked for Salida Conservation Corps, front country just means you're like living out of a van, and back country means you have to carry everything in. And they both have their pluses and minuses, for sure. So a good way to get your foot in the door with these trails, if you did want to work for like the Park Service or the Forest Service on a trail crew, those jobs can be competitive. But there are a lot of AmeriCorps crews across the country, which is like what I did, Salida Conservation Corps or Southwest Conservation Corps, sorry. And then there's like usually several in every state. Mile High Youth Corps here in Denver, Southwest Conservation Corps in Durango also. But they are hired like through the government because AmeriCorps is a government program. But they're like managed by individual nonprofits, and they usually have like a youth policy. So you have to be like 24 under, for some crews 18 and under. They really want students. They really want people who don't have experience that are looking to get experience. And I think that it can be daunting economically because like the AmeriCorps program pays you a stipend instead of a real salary. But if you do have like the privilege to live that way for 5 months, as I did, it can be a really, really good way to make connections and get your foot in the door. All right, and then moving on, sort of the same way, it is good to make those same types of connections if you're interested in wildland firefighting. And a lot of people move from trail crew to wildland fire. Can anybody tell me what's wrong with this picture of these two wildland firefighters?
You look very frustrated, or whoever. I can't even tell.
Yeah, that's me. Okay. I do look very frustrated. My answer was going to be they are too clean. They are not fighting any fires because their uniforms are pristine. So this picture is actually from a training that I did in 2017 called the Women in Wildland Fire. And it was when I was living down in New Mexico. It was 2 weekends, and we actually got paid by the Forest Service because they are in a huge push to try to get women on these fire crews. There are a lot of different types of wildland fire crews. There are engine crews, which actually have like, it's not the traditional fire engine, but it does spray water with a hose. You have hand crews that use just hand tools. So all of the skills you learned on trail crew, you can really put to use there. You got your shovels and your pickmatics, and hotshot crew are kind of like the most one of the most intense types of crews. Like they're called hotshots, literally, because I guess they think they are. And they travel throughout the country, and they're the ones that get sent in when a situation gets really, really serious. And they get sent in with chainsaws, with hand tools, all kinds of things. And they're like front lines, and some of the most amazing, badass women that I know are on hotshot crews. And hell attack, they use a helicopter to drop flame retardant or spray water on a fire. Occasionally, if there's like a reservoir or a big lake nearby, the helicopters can suck up the water and spray it on the fire, which I've always thought was cool. And then smoke jumpers, also insanely badass. They parachute out of airplanes into areas with tools to fight the fires in areas where they can't be accessed on foot.
Wow. Super intense.
What am I up against? We've got fire, obviously, that you're fighting, but also toxic masculinity. That was a big part of my experience when I did the training. I was actually thinking about going into Wildland Fire. I applied for a job, I got a job, and I backed out at the last minute because I didn't think that I could like martyr myself for that cause. there is a huge culture of sexual harassment and assault in Wildland Fire. I don't want to spend too much time dwelling on that. But that is, one of the barriers that people face when trying to get into these jobs. It's not all, oh, I don't know the right people. It's not all, I don't have the right experience. Sometimes it's the culture that's keeping people out. When I went to this training in New Mexico, I brought it up because I have these amazing friends who work on fire crews who are women. And I brought up the culture of toxic masculinity and got shut down so hard that most of the other students at this training didn't even want to talk to me or my few friends who were on my side about it for the rest of the time. And they, there were a lot of things. One example that I think is really used to try to keep women out of stuff like this is the bears and periods thing. So if anyone out there doesn't know, women are not more at risk for people who menstruate are not more at risk for bear attacks if they are on their periods. And it was like a myth that started in the 1970s because there were 2 bear attacks in Glacier National Park, and both of them involved people who were menstruating while they were menstruating. But that was literally one of those correlation is not causation things. And so many independent studies, government studies and independent studies since then have completely debunked it. Yet it is still Forest Service official policy to evacuate an employee if they are menstruating in the backcountry. They will fly helicopters into remote Alaska and evacuate them. And I brought this up at the training because the men who worked for the Forest Service were sitting around telling these young women that they had to watch out for this, watch out for bears when they were on their periods.
Wow.
And then I brought up the truth that it wasn't, and they wouldn't listen to me, wouldn't acknowledge that I might be correct. I went home, did some research, emailed them, said, since this is an important safety issue, here are some links. I think you really need to share this with everyone. And they didn't. So, yeah. That is my big rambly example, but that is the type of thing that you're up against. But the amazing thing about this is that the culture is changing. And like I said, there are these amazing people who are out there proving that non-cis-het males can do this work and do it well, so that a generation from now, there will be absolutely no question about that. And I am sure of that. Okay, so moving on. The Forest Service also offers many, many jobs in the sciences. Wildlife biology offered a big one, geology, hydrology. So that can be working for fish hatcheries and stocking lakes with fish and all sorts of stuff like that. Geospatial technology is using GIS and mapping technologies to, for instance, respond to an incident like a fire and map out the characteristics of major disturbances to help people on the front line. It can also be mapping for the sake of potentially designating new wilderness because you're mapping out different wilderness characteristics in different areas. So yeah, that was my super brief knowledge of the sciences. Not my field of expertise, but I know many amazing folks. And I also I'll mention now, and I'll say it again, that if anyone wants to reach out to me directly after this presentation to learn more or get connected to people who know more than I do, you're strongly encouraged to do so. All right. Moving on, yeah, law enforcement. So I'm not really pro people becoming cops, but I guess if you have to become a cop, you might want to consider being a forest cop. It's again one of those jobs that starts as seasonal but can turn into a full-fledged career. Do a lot of permitting, patrol, rule enforcement. But then I think there are also a lot of opportunities for different rangers to work on more educational programs, give tours to kids coming to parks and stuff. And this is the only picture of a park ranger that I had in my own personal collection. That's actually me getting attacked by that lion. This was when I was studying abroad in South Africa. So I'm like very grateful to that park ranger.
Wow.
Okay, so I know that was a lot of information. Okay, oh yeah, so let's talk about how to find these jobs, and then I'll give you guys the chance to ask questions about them. So working for the government requires you to go through a really, really specific website called usajobs.gov, and you can search for any type of job in any location, and there's often a whole lot, and you will be required to not only upload your resume, but also painstakingly recreate your resume by hand in their software, and then apply for a whole mess of jobs at once if that's what you want to do. It's also really important after you do that to track down the numbers for the people who are hiring in that district and personally call them. Because they get so many thousands of applications. Like making those personal connections are really, really important. Applying year after year and calling year after year if you know you really want to do something and you don't get it on the first time, like that happens too. I know a lot of people who have tried to get on Wildland Fire crews for a couple years before making it on, but they eventually have done so. And then, yeah, like I mentioned before, AmeriCorps can be a really, really good entry point to that. One of the benefits of AmeriCorps, although they don't really pay you a salary at the very end of your term, so like at the end of my 5 months on the trail crew, I got an education award, and that's money that I can apply towards like any kind of educational endeavor from an accredited institution. I used it to get my wilderness first responder. You do have to pay taxes on it, but you know, you can use it to beef up your resume with, say, a wilderness first responder. And then occasionally some of these nonprofits that use AmeriCorps will also do an individual placement program where they hire and train people, but then actually like place them with the Forest Service or the Park Service. So it's almost like an internship, but it's through these same nonprofit organizations. And then the Forest Service also has an internship program called Pathways, and they accept everyone from high school through recent college graduates. It can be temporary or it can be indefinite. And I actually know somebody who started as a Pathways intern in the world of GIS and became recently a full-time employee. So yeah, awesome. But when you work for the government, they really want you to start and stay. You can get your foot in the door. Okay.
Yeah.
Any questions?
Yes, please submit your questions. I had something in mind and I lost it.
No worries.
I was particularly struck by the firefighting example. Yeah. That's pretty unfortunate. I'm glad it's changing, but I imagine it's happening very slowly. Yeah. Oh, I think I have a question. So, at least in my experience of navigating the USA Jobs web, literally has every job. Yeah. It's not just outdoor stuff. It's it's literally everything. Is that like a lot of things in our society is very binary. And I honestly haven't looked at the site in a long time, but has it changed to your knowledge? Do you think they have updated it to add more gender inclusive like options and not just like binary?
I haven't looked at USA Jobs in a while. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that question.
But that's just like
except to take that screenshot.
Because I just remember it being very old, like
Yeah.
old fashioned.
Well, and that is one of the, and that is, I think, one of the unfortunate things, you know, when you talk about careers in the outdoors, they're certainly not all this way. But the example I gave, you know, Wildland Fire and Trail Crew too, is often has the vibe of like an old boys club, and people are not receptive to hearing about like more modern feminist issues, gender issues, LGBTQIA. Like, it's, there's so many like all male trail crews and so many all male fire crews that I would imagine, especially for somebody who is, for example, non-binary, like the job application would just be the start of aggravation over that. So I don't want, at the same time, I don't want to discourage people. I just, you know, people should know that this is the reality of it, and it needs to change, and it will change, and it's going to change because of people who are brave.
Yeah, and the thing about the government and government jobs, anything at like a federal level is really gonna take a long time. Like it's a long time to update. There are a lot of even state level things that people encounter that are way behind as well. So it just takes some time. And I didn't bring that question to discourage anybody, but just to like be aware that there may, like, in terms of the way that the system is laid out, that it may be super not updated. So, and to sort of expect that. And it doesn't mean that the people who would be doing the hiring are necessarily going to be biased about it. So just wanted to say that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I certainly don't want to paint the picture that like every like outdoor job for the government is going to be like this, because they're not. Oh my gosh. No, you'll have your like super like randomly progressive fire crew in Rawlins, Wyoming. I happen to know that it exists.
Awesome. Okay.
Okay, so guiding and outdoor ed, I think this one will be a little bit shorter because it's a little bit more straightforward. So if you go to the next slide, I've listed a bunch of types of guiding and outdoor ed. So these are the jobs where like, if you want to go into a career in the outdoors, you ask yourself a bunch of questions, right? Like, do I want to sit at a desk? Do I want to work outside? Do I want to work with people? Do I want to work alone? These are the jobs where you do want to sleep under the stars and you really want to work with people. And you are passionate about taking the things that inspired you and that you love about the outdoors and helping pass those on to other people. Guiding is the capitalist version. So guiding, clients pay for a trip. It's typically a backpacking, mountaineering, or river rafting trip. And it's like very straightforward. Like the guides, you know, help with everything, gear, navigation, teaching them about the area, and often act as porters, which means they carry some of the weight for other people's gear, and as guides. And most of these are like small private companies, doesn't pay amazing, but like it's, you know, people who are living the like raft guide lifestyle. They just love the river. They love to be outside all the time. And then outdoor education is definitely a little bit more focused. A lot of that is also what we call like pay to play. So, and it'll be young people, most of the time, students who enroll in these courses and learn skills. So they're definitely carrying their own food, and they are often learning a variety of things: climbing, hiking, rafting. And this can be, I mean, there's a lot of different forms of this. We have Knowles and Outward Bound, I think, too, that people will probably have heard of before. And they offer very long, extensive courses where you develop very technical skills, and these courses are very costly, although they do offer scholarships sometimes. And then, you know, there's summer camp. It's like your local summer camp. My cousins for years worked for a summer camp up in the Chicago area, but they would like go to a lot of different places, and they just like took kids canoeing, middle school, high school. And then the third type is wilderness therapy. So wilderness therapy is a little bit more complicated, and it can sometimes be controversial because it is the use of like immersion in the wilderness to help people heal, to overcome mental struggles, or in certain cases, this isn't quite the same thing, but like to correct behavior. People use it a lot when kids have like big behavioral problems. So we'll send them off to wilderness therapy, where hopefully the experience enables or equips them to deal with real life problems a little bit better. And those exist all over the country too. I'm going to quickly highlight, I know we're probably running short on time, so I'm going to very quickly highlight two examples of outdoor education that I find to be particularly inspiring. And then, yeah, next slide.
Okay, wasn't sure, sorry.
Yeah. Sorry, no worries. I was going to run my own PowerPoint, but we ran into technical difficulties. Yeah, the Venture Out project is one that's really cool. It was founded by a queer trans man in Vermont, I think. And they run mostly in the Northeast, but they take people of all ages. They do all different kinds of trips. And yeah, the whole mission is just to like get queer people into the outdoors and go backpacking. And it is something that you pay for. It is something that people apply for individually, but I know they do have scholarships. And I think that you can apply from anywhere. Just all the trips are like in the Northeast. They also have a program where people can sign up to become local volunteers and lead day hikes. And then Big City Mountaineers is the organization that I work for. So obviously a little biased. Okay. I don't know why it says youth ages 6 to 18. That's actually super not true, and I apologize. It should say 13 to 18. Wow. Okay.
It happens.
Don't tell anyone about this, Meryl. Please don't tell Lance. So youth ages 13 to 18, and we partner with agencies in Colorado, California, the Pacific Northwest, Minnesota, and Boston. A great example being Rainbow Alley. A couple others in the area are like, we partner with College Track Aurora, Elk, Environmental Learning for Kids, the Odyssey School, the Alameda School. And we offer these trips at absolutely no cost to the students who come on them. We have great instructors come out for a total of 7 days, including the travel days to get to and from. All of the gear is provided. They get to keep their hiking boots. And yeah, I sadly have not gotten to go on one yet, but I hope that will have changed by this time next year.
Same.
Yeah. So going on, how do I get this job? My biggest tip is get that Wilderness First Responder certification. It's typically about a 10-day course, and it's your big long intro to wilderness medicine. It goes a little bit in depth about how to deal with all kinds of bad situations in the backcountry. And then that is the certification that you need for almost all of these jobs. And then I also included a link to the Outdoor Ed jobs site. I would recommend too, just like the places like Knowles and Outward Bound, you can actually take courses with them that qualify you to become an instructor. And we are actually hoping to do the same thing at Big City Mountaineers one day, except that our students won't have to pay for the courses.
Awesome. Yeah, I was going to ask how much of the courses are.
Oh, they can get really costly. I mean, and it totally depends because you have everything from like 3 weeks in Wyoming to a semester in New Zealand, right? So it like completely depends. Are you asking about the wilderness first responder?
Yes, yeah, that one. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So again, depends. Like the Knowles ones are more expensive. The Knowles ones I think can be up to $1,000. But then there are some that you can get for like $300.
Oh.
Just Google wilderness first responder in your area.
Awesome.
All right. So conservation, yeah, this is kind of where I landed after the CDT. And this is basically the nonprofit life. So I don't know how much everybody knows about nonprofits, but you work really hard for something you really believe in. And again, you don't make that much money, but you do get pro deals and a lot of vacation time. So conservation, what does that mean? So public lands, as we talked about earlier, there are all these different types of public land in our country, but not all. There are a lot of people who don't want it to stay that way. There are a lot of people who want to see that land privatized, sold off for things like ranching and farming, logging, and most notably oil and gas drilling. So just because something is a protected wilderness now does not mean it always will be. So fighting for public lands is hugely important. Fighting for clean water as well. Like it's not just about recreation and rafting. That's the water that all of us end up drinking. And then fighting climate change, of course, ties into that because as the planet heats, there might not be enough water for all of us to drink anymore. Here in Colorado, we are in a much bigger drought right now than we were this time last year. And then, of course, environmental justice. As I was talking about earlier, sort of intersectional environmentalism that says, like, we need to address the more pressing justice problems. We're not, like, just talking about carbon emissions here. The most polluted zip code in the United States is here in Denver. It's Elyria, Swansea. And the water in a lot of parts in Denver a lot of people consider it like unsafe to drink. But I bet there are a lot of people living in Denver who do not know either of those facts. People who live in like low income and predominantly BIPOC communities are also on the front lines when it comes to weather events like hurricanes. So yeah, there's a lot of components to environmental justice. And I think that the struggle right now is getting all of the mainstream environmental organizations on board to make that the priority, to say that's not just one, bullet point on a list of topics. That is like how we need to center our work. And the good news is that a lot of organizations are trying, and the bad news is that the environmental movement is super historically white, and like the power within the movement is still concentrated in the hands of white people. So I feel very strongly about trying to increase representation in this arena in particular. Another big issue is like indigenous sovereignty and the land that we're on, which, as we all know, like this is all stolen land. And some of the people who have been working to protect our watersheds and our quote unquote public lands for the longest time are the people who that land was like taken from basically by the government. And, trying to like center that in the environmental movement and to move towards like an ecological understanding that like incorporates indigenous knowledge. I think the concept of wilderness is, inherently incorrect. It paints these areas as untouched by man, as like totally pure and pristine. But of course, that's impossible. And like all land and areas, it's been shaped like first by the indigenous inhabitants of this country, who were like pretty good stewards of the land, and then later by the white people who came in and kind of wrecked a lot of it. So that's my environmental justice in a nutshell. I think when I worked at Conservation Colorado, there were a ton of people who were like, yeah, bro, the outdoors, send it, let's go mountain biking this weekend. But then there were like a lot of people there also who didn't even, who like weren't even crazy about hiking, didn't even really do it as a hobby, weren't there for that reason. They were like, I'm here because of my community and our future. So I think that this in particular is a very powerful sector of outdoor jobs. Okay, so I realized I did not, or what can I do at a nonprofit? So yeah, I've quickly listed a bunch of the different jobs that like every nonprofit has. I myself was in organizing. So like I said, that was actually going out to events, trying to get people to do things that would make other people pass laws that would help everyone. And then if you were to work in policy or advocacy, you'd kind of just be like the higher, or the next level up from that, working in coalitions of more like powerful decision makers and stakeholders. Communications is definitely something that every nonprofit needs. And that talking to press releases, copywriting, social media is actually like turning into a huge component of jobs everywhere. And social media has been very, very powerful, particularly recently, in educating people across like the outdoor industry. You know, and like when after the George Floyd uprisings began, the outdoor industry like responded, you know, and people either responded positively or negatively, but it showed, you know, where they stood. And social media was just such a huge part of that. It was a huge part of all of it. I don't know, like, yeah. And then development, so that's fundraising. If you like writing grants or planning events, talking to wealthy people or corporate donors, development may be for you. And then I also just like want to mention that we think of the outdoors, we think of, you know, people being out in the parks or doing the science or down and lobbying at the Capitol, but every organization needs those jobs to keep it afloat. They need administrators, they need people in finance, they need people in payroll, they need people in HR. So if you're super passionate about the outdoors and you want to do something like that, plenty of opportunities for you. Okay, and then how do I get this job? This is actually just a list of links to different job boards and listservs. Like I said, I was also really recommend following organizations that you like on social media. That way you can both just see what they're up to, and they usually post when they have a job open. Reach out to professionals with jobs that interest you. So people like me, people that work for these nonprofits, for these causes, really, really love to just sit down and have one-on-ones with people who are interested in joining us. Those connections are easy to make. Like, most people are very responsive. And then one good thing about this section of the outdoor industry is like people really are starting to realize how unethical it is to offer unpaid internships. And how that just like gives the advantage to people who are already so privileged that they don't need to be making money. So organizations like Conservation Colorado are often offering a lot of paid internships. It'd be a great way to get your foot in the door.
That's awesome.
So I blasted through guiding and conservation without pausing for questions. Do we have any that have popped up?
I didn't have any. I'm also super biased because I work for a nonprofit and I've worked with nonprofits my career. So
Cool.
really don't have any questions about that. But yeah, I mean, we can keep moving on, especially for the sake of time.
Cool. Yeah, we're almost there. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was outdoor gear, because I think this is what a lot of people think of first when they hear the term outdoor industry. You know, they think of the big outdoor retailer show that under non-COVID times comes to Denver a couple times a year and takes over the convention center, and just people spend, you know, millions of dollars constructing these elaborate booths showing off their products that they make. And it's like, it's a huge economic driver for the city, actually, which is interesting. But yeah, so outdoor gear, what can I do at an outdoor gear company? Design, marketing, testing and repair, that can be fun. Again, the finance, human resources, IT, consulting. A lot of companies especially are looking for consultants currently on what we call like DEI or JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Retail, so like you want to work at a store, there's a cool outdoor gear store here in Denver. And then giving, yeah, so that's like, what if I was going to work for an outdoor gear company, I would probably want to be in like the giving sector. That's determining philanthropy, how they're using their profits. You know, there are companies like Patagonia that are putting a lot of money towards fighting climate change and other conservation work. There are a lot of companies that are giving money to organizations like Big City Mountaineers. So it's really possible to like be invested in social good and work for a company like this. These companies, because they do bring so much money to Denver and Colorado, for instance, hold a lot of political sway. This picture was taken at an event at the Outdoor Retailer Show with 4 Point Star, a local company that makes energy bars. They are super good. They sent me a bunch on the PCT. And they were great. But this was an event that I organized called Karaoke for the Core Act. And it was a karaoke event targeting our Senator Cory Gardner to try to get him to support CORE Act, which is Colorado Outdoor Recreation and Economy. So yeah, so business advocacy, there's like whole coalitions of outdoor businesses in Colorado that will get together to do things like lobby or write sign-on letters. Like it's yeah, very, very possible to do good. And then how do I get this job? Again, yep, that's just a bunch of links. And networking.
Awesome. And I can try to put all this stuff together to post on our Facebook and possibly our Instagram for people to look at later.
Cool. All right. So yeah, in conclusion, I think I've talked a lot about hopefully the joys and the challenges that have come with navigating this industry as a queer woman. And yeah, it's sometimes, you know, can feel overwhelming. There's like, it's still so like cis-het white male driven. There's almost no LGBTQIA representation. When people of color try to talk about their experiences, it's labeled as political. I see that constantly. You know, there's an old guard that are resistant to changes, but sometimes it feels like, yay. I took this picture of myself at the top of a mountain in New Mexico called Oregon Needle. And this was after I went to the visitor center at this park to get a parking pass, just asked to park. And this old man park ranger named Chuck told me that I had, quote unquote, absolutely no chance of making it to the top of this mountain. So.
Wow. You know.
Sorry, Chuck.
Sometimes they just be just very wrong, just blatantly. So this is the time that we would like y'all to ask some questions. So So if you have any questions, please put it in the comments and we will get to them. Oops, I don't know how that happened. Okay. I think I have a question. It's not fully developed. But you talked about how there's not a whole lot of queer representation, not really a lot of female representation. I imagine that would mean that in terms of people of color, there's even less. Yeah. And so, I mean, have you been in situations where you had like a diverse group of like coworkers? Because I mean, when I think about the outdoor industry, I just feel like everybody's white, or at least most of the people are white. Just based on what you see in gear, like if you look at like gear websites, like your companies, like the models, all white. I think that some organizations are also white. When you think government, it's like white. So, yeah, I'm just wondering if there was a scenario ever in your multitude of experiences where there is some diversity, and like how that handled, and how supported do you think those folks were, or do you, like, from what you saw?
I have a number of different answers, because I've had all these different jobs. When I was on the trail crew, there were almost no people of color. I worked with only one man of color on the crew. And I thought that was just like, yeah, it was unfortunate. I don't know. I think that the recruiters were not doing the job that they could have to reach out to communities of color. In part, maybe because it was during the recession and everybody was like clamoring to get these jobs. But it's interesting because, when I was on trail crew in 2013, it was a bunch of like mostly white recent college graduates. And one of my close friends has like worked in that same industry, particularly the AmeriCorps Youth Conservation Corps, for many years afterwards. And she was like, yeah, the demographic totally changed. Like it's a lot of, people of color now. I mean, she worked down in Arizona too, so that was slightly different. But and then at CDTC, our executive director was actually a woman of color, and that is amazing because she was the only woman of color, I think, to be at the helm of any national trails organization. And I have a hard time thinking of any other nonprofit even that is about racial justice in some way that has a woman of color at the helm. So yeah, that was a great opportunity to be a part of that. And, CDTC, I think when you're looking at all of the organizations that manage long distance trails, they're doing a lot more than organizations like the PCTA are. They came under fire recently for silencing people of color on their Facebook page. And then at Conservation Colorado, we had a whole team that was sort of a sub-team within Conservation Colorado called Protégete, and their focus was specifically organizing in the Latino community here in the Denver area. So yeah, super fortunate to work with them. There were some people of color on, under the Conservation Colorado umbrella that wasn't Protégete, but our whole senior staff, all of the people in positions of power, were white. And yeah, that was a source of some division. I'm really throwing a lot of
didn't mean to do that, but that's, didn't mean to do that, but that's I mean, sometimes.
Yeah, no, I think that like I'll speak more generally. I've been fortunate to work with people of color, but they are the minority, and not a lot of them have been happy with the way that they are treated at their organizations. Feel like their like concerns are undermined, and that like the JEDI work, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, has become a side project for a lot of organizations. You know, a book club. And rather than like being centered in the way that it should. And then of course there's, it's a world that's rife with microaggressions. The outdoor world has a lot of like word usage that's super problematic and very, very like violent and colonialist. When you talk about like conquering the mountains and like peak bagging and like there was a big another controversy recently over climbing routes having racist names, like super racist names. And the community and people of color, of course, doing the heavy lifting to try and figure out a way to change that, because so many like climbing enthusiasts were completely married to the traditional way of doing it, which is the first person to climb it gets to name it.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the response that I figured. But that just means that folks who are watching need to, who are interested in going into an outdoors job, basically needs to get on in there and try to change some stuff. Because it's, you know, it's got to change. Awesome. I do not see any questions in the comments, but I wanted to thank you, Jenny, for joining us today and talking about outdoors jobs in depth, more depth than I do.
Too much depth? I hope not.
Oh no, good. I learned something.
Okay, great.
And as always, I want to also thank Kendra for being our interpreter this evening from Rainfrog Interpreters. She's great, y'all. And before we completely go offline, I wanted to put up the link for the post survey so y'all can fill that out. But yeah, thank y'all for joining us today. And Jenny, do you have any last words for the folks who are watching or maybe watching the recording of this?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on here. I think, you know, we ended on a bit of a, you know, talking about the many, many challenges that can be faced by people of color and the racism in the outdoors. And I just want to give a shout out to all of the extremely hardworking people of color I know who are changing that, even though like day by day they just face like more and more that I'm inspired by them, and like I don't know, I feel a little bit weird about being the one to give this talk as a white woman, because thank you so much for having me, and like please thank you for listening. Do reach out, Instagram me, email me, whatever. And I would be happy to talk to you or to connect you with people that would be happy to talk to you.
Yeah, awesome. I was going to say something profound, but it's gone. So I guess it's not going to happen.
Just imagine.
Just imagine I said something. So with all of that, y'all, we will close with keeping it clean, queer, and under control.